So, all right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's session at our JSL. My name is Zaharuddin, and I am a third-year PhD candidate at the Graduate School of International Studies at Utsunomiya University. And today I'm going to be talking and presenting about the role of own language in the Japanese language classroom. So, just before I start, I want to just say that this presentation is mainly based on a paper that I have recently published and part of my dissertation. So it is mainly centered on Malaysia, which is where I'm from. So, but it's still it talks about own language as a whole, in especially in Japanese language, the Japanese language area. So I think it can be beneficial for everyone who's interested. Okay. So, first of all, what is own language? Own language refers to the shared language which the students and the teacher already know, and through which, if allowed, they can use to study the new language. Um, a more common name for own language is the first language or the mother tongue. But the reason why we opt to use the term own language instead is especially in multilingual communities, using first language or mother tongue is not actually accurate because we tend to mix up. We tend to mix our languages together. So, for example, in Malaysia, this is one of our favorite examples of the linguistic environment there, where we mix English, Malay, a little bit of Mandarin, and also a little bit of Tamil into one whole sentence. So, like this magazine cover where it says, "Wei macha, you want to makan here or tapau?" So, I'm sure you all understand you want to makan is eat in Malay here, or tapau is takeout in Hokkien, which is a Chinese dialect. Matcha is brother in Tamil. So this is the kind of what you would are example of what own language. So if you go to Malaysia, you hear this. Most Malaysians can understand what you're talking about because we mix up all the languages together. So yeah, since students in Malaysia are more likely, or not just students, people in Malaysia are more likely to use Malay and English interchangeably, with bits of Mandarin and also Tamil due to their multiracial backgrounds. Thus, using own language will be more appropriate for our study, for my study at least. So now that we know what is own language, let's talk about the positive effects of own language use. And for the reason why this needs to be highlighted is because, especially in the language field, the what people think of own language has always been quite negative because it's always assumed to hinder students from learning, and that's why if we look at the history from all our learning methods, we have different kind of most learning methods back in the day started with the direct method. Those all focused on English only classrooms, or as English is the big example, but for other classrooms as well, even in Japanese, even in the Japanese area, even in the Japanese field, we have Chokusetsuho, which is the direct method, where you really just focus on using the target language only, and you do not allow use of own language in the classroom. But as of recently, literature has shown that own language can be helpful to students' second language development. Not only second language, but also foreign language development, either way, which includes the ability to promote the acquisition of, in this case, of if English, biliteracy development. Other than that, also have positive impact on elementary level students' recall and retention when acquiring vocabulary, and also, as stated by Sariko Bantuna Simuyan, to make learning and teaching process more effective, to lower anxiety, to create a positive classroom atmosphere, to teach grammar structures and new vocabulary items. So people are starting to see own language in a new light, or a better light, I would say. And we're moving towards this people trying to implement own language and trying to get rid of the old stigma that has often been associated with it. So this is one angle of how own language use can help students, or one of the issues when it comes to studying the language. Another angle on of why we need to talk about the positive effects of own language use is the angle of the non-native speaker teacher. So literature shows that non-native speaker teachers often feel inadequate due to their position that is regarded secondary to the idealized native speaker. So this feeling of NNSC as language teacher is defined by Bernard as NNSC imposterhood. So I'm sure this is quite familiar to if you are a non-native speaker teacher. This tends to come up a lot where when you are applying for jobs and they have this kind of policy that you have to be a native, in this case, English speaker. But this also applies for other languages as well. Sometimes they want you to be a Japanese language teacher or a French native speaker, so you have to be a native. So it doesn't matter, even though you have you fill all the other criteria, you have a BA degree, you have TOEFL, TESOL, or CELTA, you have experience, but just because you're not native speaker, you don't get the job, or you're not at that same level. So what this does is actually it cements that feeling of imposterhood and does little for the confidence of NNSTs. And furthermore, if you're wondering how is this related to own language, actually, is because since the non-native speaker teacher is aspiring to be the native speaker, the non-native speaker teacher will kind of hold themselves back from using own language because they feel, oh no, if I start using it in the classroom, then that makes me kind of lesser, like I'm not the native speaker teacher because I'm using own language in the classroom. So I'm not as good. So that's the kind of thinking that happens when we focus a lot on the direct method, or Japanese only or English only policies in classrooms or such. But so how own language can help to elevate these elevate how the non-native speaker teachers feel about themselves, or eradicate this feeling of imposterhood. We'll talk about it a little bit after this in the next section. So now that we've seen both aspects of what exactly is the role of own, why is it important to why is own language important per se for students and also for teachers? The main bulk, now we're going to talk about the role of own language. So what is it that own language can do to help these two angles that we have just highlighted? So before we get into this part, I didn't create a slide for this, but just a bit of a backstory. Of course, the role of own language when it comes to learning languages, or like stated in the literature, we have helping them to understand more. We have those aspects, but another aspect of how it can help is in helping to how own language can help the localization of language education in that country. So in my research, when I talk about the localization of Japanese language education in Malaysia, this is the part where I think own language plays a very big role. So what is localization? Localization is when we localization is when we create a syllabus or a learning experience which is unique to that of that country. So since Malaysia is a multilingual country, Malaysia has multilingual students, so the syllabus or the learning styles of Japanese language in Malaysia should reflect that of the people. So that's kind of what localization is. And so the what own language can do is own language can help with that localization of Japanese language. So the first part of how it can help, or the first role of it in that localization, is using own language to create a diversified learning experience. So previously, the Japanese language education in Malaysia was mainly dominated by programs sponsored by the government, and this focused primarily on native like competence and motivation to study abroad because the main aim was to get into a Japanese university and graduate and live in Japan. However, as of late, Malaysian students with a variety of motivations of learning the language have been identified. And this includes learning the language to read comics or just watch a movie without subtitles, use it as an asset in the workplace, and even to make new friends. So, these diverse motivations of students have called for a more diverse learning experience, which can be achieved through the inclusion of own language use in the Japanese language classroom. So, for example, here, what's on the screen is these are two textbooks that are available in Malaysia. On the left, it's in Malay. It's basically a Japanese language textbook, but it's fully in Romaji. There's no hiragana, there's no katakana. So it's actually used in a university in Malaysia where students take a Japanese course, but it's just for them since their motivation is to just learn it as a credit in the class and to just have a taste of what Japan is like. They don't have to specifically learn hiragana, katakana, and which can be difficult. So they have this specified textbook to help with that um, diverse motivation. On the right hand side is a also a textbook which is used in one of the language schools in Malaysia. It is more for the students who are kind of interested in the pop culture and the cultural side of Japan, wanting to learn Japanese for the anime, for the manga, for the dramas. The title is very funny, which is Bakayaro, but it's a different way that students can learn Japanese. And of course, this one, the front has Malay on it, but the inside also contains English. We have some English translations as well, a mix of own language for Malaysians. So having these kinds of textbooks make it and which include own language, create that diversified learning experience. So previously, I guess when you want to learn Japanese, everyone would just mostly in Malaysia would go, oh, you need the Mina no Nihongo book. You need the Mina no Nihongo book, which is mostly all in Japanese and focused towards the students who want to study abroad, kind of thing. So yeah, this is the first aspect that own language can actually help in the localization of Japanese language education in this case Malaysia. Okay. Um, the next aspect is using own language to reduce dependency on the native speaker teachers. So, as stated previously, the non-native speaker teachers will feel reluctant in using own language in the classroom because they feel like, oh, that's not what the native speaker teacher would do. And although that because there's so many negative connotations surrounding own language use that people don't want to use it, and although studies have revealed that this is unsupported by research and it can't help, teachers still feel very guilty when they want to use own language, and it's usually used as a kind of a last resort kind of thing. um, and what happens is that it leads to kind of overuse in the classroom. But so that's why people don't want to use it and whatnot. And what having own language use, what own language use can do is give the non-native speaker teachers the ability to take control of the local narrative without dependence on the native speaker teacher. So instead of following, so like for Malaysia, initially the Japanese language syllabus was originally obtained from the Japan Foundation, which was modeled after the native speaker teacher. So when it is modeled after the native speaker teacher, the non-native speaker teachers will have to kind of fit into that mold, and they are not allowed. They aren't able to develop their own local teaching style without the constant need to consult NSTs. So with own language, what it can do is to help them develop this own local teaching style, find a way to implement own language in their classroom, and find their own become a teacher in their own right. If I take the words from Vivian Cook in his multi-competence theory, where you are a teacher in your own right with your own teaching style of implementing own language. It doesn't have to all be about the native speaker teacher. So it gives them the ability to really help the students in the area to study, which is what is most natural for them. Yeah, so that is the second part of using own language to reduce dependency on the native speaker teachers. Okay, the last one is the role of own language in to increase local participation. So own language use also increases the rate of participation from local teachers and students, as it is more accessible, and students do not need to be fluent to be able to take part in the conversation. So for example, this is a example on social media from Twitter, where people freely share their own strategies of learning Japanese. So this is Noob-san. His Twitter feed is very is catered to all these really short Japanese, how to learn Japanese in Malay and English. But the one I chose here is in Malay. So for example, he's telling like how to tell the difference between dochira and dochi, and how to use it in a sentence. Yeah, so what this actually does is this increases the amount of resources available to teachers and students, which creates a unique discourse of Japanese language education in the country. So by having all this kind of accessible own language inclusive materials, students will be more want to participate because they'll feel, oh, I understand this, I can do this, which can be better than and less intimidating than a class where everything has to be in the target language and whatnot. This is another example of Jepun who's explaining the word kantan, giving example of, okay, Nihongo wa kantan desu ne. You have the Romaji and you have the translation. So having this enables students to, they can reply and they can ask more questions. So it really makes a healthier discourse, I would say. Yeah, so that's the three main aspects of own language to in the localization of Japanese language education in a country. So those are what it can do and what it can help with the country. But it brings us to the next question. And the next question is how do we achieve this? How are we supposed to fully utilize own language so that it can be it can help with all the things that we've just stated just now? Of course, if it was easy, if it was easily used, then it can happen. But as stated previously in literature, what happens when it comes to own language use in classroom is the issue of overuse. teachers do want to use it, but when they start using it, they tend to overuse it or not use it in a proper framework, because that framework does not exist right now. It's just a matter of you want to use it or you don't want to use it, or you use it but you're not using it in the proper framework, and that's why we are not able to achieve it as the valuable tool that it's supposed to be. Yeah, so that part. Okay, so the next thing is, so how do we achieve this? Basically, based on Makaro's positions in his paper, he talked about the optimal position, and what the optimal position is, trying to have a framework of how we can use own language use, and that is through the principled use of own language. And I think the name kind of speaks for itself in that sense, in that it is how we can use own language in a principled way to avoid overuse and to make it the best way to allow it to be achieve its what it can do, which is to help the students. So for the next part, I'll be talking about the different types of ways we can, of the different methods of principal use of own language, and maybe we'll take some time to do some quick own language principal use activities together. So the first principal use is the functional translation technique, introduced by Wessler in 1997. So the functional translation method is one of the earliest methods that included students' own language to help the student understand and convey the meaning of ideas most useful to them. So this method focused on addressing the issues faced with the traditional grammar translation method. So all the issues because to be honest, the real villain per se is the grammar translation method, because everyone had an issue with GTM, and that's why I was like, oh, because GTM is like this, that's why we should use own language because it's not so good. So it addresses those issues, and Weschler presented 4 features of this method, which is firstly the goal of the method, the type of language being translated, materials used to apply the method, and the classroom procedures. So the goal of this method is to enable students to learn the target language they want using the own language when necessary. And the biggest contrast that it has is that grammar translation method has kind of rigid, is kind of a rigid type of language. It works in a very tight environment, I would say. But the functional translation method focuses on the needs of the students and is more flexible. And if the student needs it, then they'll be able to use own language when they want. So these procedures are intended to be communicative and student-centered. So this is one of the more earlier types of principled use. So it's not exactly, like I say, the framework is there, but it still needs a lot of fine-tuning. So then we have, so this is the first one back in 1987. The next one is the most common and most easily applicable one, which is the sandwich technique. So introduced by Butzcam in 2008, Butzcam claimed that the principal use of own language will be able to help teachers modulate the classroom atmosphere that they wish to create. And he suggested the technique of sandwiching to minimize classroom disruption flow and confirm students' comprehension. So the name sandwich technique comes exactly from how a sandwich kind of looks like. So it involves a 3-step procedure where the teacher introduces a new word in the target language, inserts a brief translation in the own language, and repeats it again in the target language. So for example, if you are in a classroom and you are giving instructions and you're like, "Hai, minasan, sumimasen, kiite kudasai, please listen, kiite kudasai." So that's the sandwich. You have the kiite kudasai, please listen, kiite kudasai. Target language, own language, target language. So yeah, this this actually helps them to easily understand what you are trying to say, and it is actually one of the easiest way for you to start introducing own language into the classroom if you are starting to use it in the classroom. So when it comes to minimizing the class disruption flow, this you can mostly use this when it comes to questions, because the biggest issue I guess in language classrooms is vocabulary, where you don't understand what the teacher is saying or you don't understand the word. So maybe a student can say, すみません先生、歴史は何ですか？歴史は何ですか? So instead of the teacher going, 歴史 歴史は and then trying to explain it, and 歴史 is very abstract, instead they can go say, 歴史 history or sejarah 歴史 so it minimizes the disruption, so the student will also immediately understand. So they'll be like, oh, okay, all right, that's what it means, and you can go on with the class. Bascom also explained that this is different from word lists that you just give students, because it gives a type of meaning conveyance which includes pragmatic aspects of meaning. So it's slightly different from just giving them translated words. Yeah. So this is the sandwich technique, which is I think one of the principal ways to include it inside your classroom. And also because the usage is very in short bursts, so it's not an overuse. It's not like you taking the whole 5 minutes trying to actually explain what it is, right? Okay, so the next one is the mirroring technique, also introduced by Bascom, and this time with Caldwell as well. The technique is based on the principle of double comprehension, where students must understand what is meant and what is literally said. So this technique also involves 3 main steps, where students are first given an example in the target language, as well as the meaning. So you can see, like in step 1, you have the example, which is Typhoon no tame kyou no ibentou wa juushi shimasu. And you have the meaning, which is the correct translation. Today's event has been cancelled because of the typhoon. But what it also, the mirroring part comes in the third one, which is Typhoon tame, event has been cancelled. So it's literally actually giving them a gloss of knowing what is happening, so they know exactly what it means and how it is expressed. So then the second step is giving them examples for them to translate, and lastly, allowing them to practice making their own sentences. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to the last one, which is reverse translation, in which introduced by Kerr, who defend against critics who argued that students from different countries who have no shared OL with each other or the teacher can't use OL, but actually you can still use own language even if you don't have any shared languages. So some examples of reverse translation are such as conducting grammar or vocabulary revisions using reverse translation. So an example clip, I do have an example clip on this, but since I think I'm running a bit out of time and I want to focus on the activity in a bit, so I think I'm just going to skip this part. But either way, a simple example of reverse translation is having dictation in the class and giving them sentences, but they are not supposed to write it in the language. They're supposed to write it in their own language. Yeah, so that's what they can do. And then, so instead of saying, 今日は暖かいです。今日は暖かいです。So they don't write 今日は暖かいです。They have to translate it in their own language. So if it's in English, they have to say something like, today is hot. And at the end of the class, the sensei would tell them, okay, now I want you to translate that back into Japanese. So it's something, one of the ways you can use reverse translation. Okay, so so this is the type of multilingual classrooms of how you can apply various different activities. So the thing about all these own language activities, they're actually very easily implemented when you are in a face-to-face class. So now that we are in this online realm, it can be a bit difficult. to actually have it done. But there are some activities that can still be carried out, although not perfect, but I think can help students or help try to implement own language in your classroom. So we're going to try a very simple version of that today. So so the first activity is making a glossary. So this activity is usually used for the more beginner students. For the more beginner students, before you start your class, before you start your course, you can have this where what this activity does is in order to study basic classroom meta language. So these are what you will usually be used, the instructions you're usually going to use in the class. So for this activity, what you do is you have the phrases on the board. So for example, you have these phrases and the students will translate the words that they don't understand, or which one they don't understand. So this is a quick activity, I think. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to escape from here for a while. And in the chat box, I will be sharing a link with everyone. Okay. Right, hang on. Yeah. Mm. Okay, so I've just sent a very simple Google Docs link in the chat. You can freely access it for everyone. So I'm going to open it here as well so people can see. Yeah. Okay, so this is what you'll be seeing. So what happens is for each of the words that you don't know or the students don't know, they can find out through dictionaries, and they can write down the translations in their own language, because these are kind of the instructions that you will use a lot in the classroom. So in the future, whenever the sensei says something like "kite kudasai" and they don't remember, they can refer to it and say, "Oh, okay, this is what it means," and they can use it for future and upcoming class. And having this activity also allows you to minimize overuse, because the students are using it at their own expense and you are not taking the time to talk about key and you don't have to do the sandwich technique a lot of times, right? So with the link, I was hoping that um, you guys can fill out the words with the meanings. You can use your own language. You can use English, or if I know my own language is Malay. You can fill it out. You can access it from the chats. I think we can just take 5 minutes to just fill out any of the words that fill out any of the words that you know or don't know, or I don't know the Japanese level or anyone, but you can Google it for a while to see what the meaning is. So I'm just going to take quick 1 or 2 minutes to just see, or does everyone already know the meaning of the words? If oh yeah, all right, yeah, that's easy one, right? Yeah, so that's why you can use this for the especially beginner classes, so they can actually remember what it's about. Yeah. Yeah, for words like kudasai can be quite tricky, I guess, because they always come, yeah, it come in a set. Yeah. All right, that's pretty good. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, so for jibun no bun o tsukutte kudasai, oneself. Bun, I guess is sentence or actually bunsho, but yeah. Yeah, and also you can, when you have this kind of activity, you can also check the students' understanding of what they're actually hearing, what they're saying, and you can correct them together and like, oh, actually, this is what it means, uh, and whatnot. So this is one of the aspects that you can use in your online classrooms to make it more interactive, I guess. Yes. All right. Okay, thank you so much. You don't have to close this tab just yet because the next activity is in sheet two. Is in sheet two, but don't look at it yet. Don't look at it yet. We'll get to it in just a bit. All right. So the next activity, so that's the first one, making a glossary for your first class. The second one is gapped reverse translation, and I think this is a lot of fun actually to do. So what you do in the gapped reverse translation is you provide them with this paragraph. It can be a very short paragraph. And on the paragraph, you have all these gaps of what words are inside. So you have this, and what you give the students is you supply them with the translated version of the paragraph. So for this paragraph, this is the full translated version. So the task is this. The task is simply to use the translation as a basis and fill out the blanks. Fill out the blanks using what words that should be inside. So for this activity, we'll take another 5 minutes. I guess it'll take a bit more time, but I don't know exactly how to show both. But I'm gonna just quickly explain this. So in the Google Sheets just now, you can click on sheet 1 down here, and you have these 1, 2, 3. You have 1 to 12. So please put in the most appropriate word that should be in the numbers. So, for example, if this one is watashi wa one, what is the word? Is all in hiragana. The 4 hiragana word. Please write it in one what you think it is. Okay. So I'm just gonna show this first so that you guys can have a look while you fill it out, and we'll take a look together at the answers in a bit. Okay. All right. I hope the instructions are clear, but yeah. So for number 1, watashi wa no toki no o de mimashita. Actually, yeah, I can open the sheets here as well, so I can see what you guys are typing. Yeah, okay. I have it on my iPad, so I can see what you guys are writing. いいですね. Yeah. So number 1, 2, 3 is okay. Number 4. Okay, so for number 1, I think most of you got it, which is 私は大学. Daigaku. So 大学. University, right? 大学の時. So Japanese movies. 日本の. So number 3 is 英語. すみません。映画 movies 映画を 英語 English 英語で見ました。いいですね。Alright. And then number 5. So I think everyone got 5 pretty well. 6 as well. So ですね。とても面白かったです。Very interesting. Yeah. 6. So yeah, the 7 with the question mark. Yes, that's correct. It's たくさん。yeah. いいですね。Yeah. たくさんついて、たくさん。そう、知りたくなりました。Alright, so for the last one, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, maybe number 9. だからいいですね。Alright, the last 3, I think. 10, 11, 12. So いいですね。Alright, so I'm just gonna go out of this for a while and show the answers. Yeah, so in the interactive classroom, you can assign students to fill it out so you can see their answers and if it's correct or not. So it's a fun way for them to also see what they are writing. And this is the one I gave is N5 level, is the most basic level. So it is a way for them to check their understanding and also check the answers. So yeah, I think everyone did a good job. It was definitely correct, don't worry. Yeah, so this is an example of kind of the interactive types of activities that you can do for online classes when it comes to online language. All right, so this is just a quick summary of everything that we've done. There's also one which is selective terms, but this is slightly more theoretical, where you choose selected words or grammatical terms that you know are more easily understood in the own language compared to the target language. But this one is a bit difficult, I think, for online classes. But yeah, I can send over my paper to read if anyone's interested. All right, so the conclusion of this presentation is to kind of highlight how own language can be beneficial to students, can be beneficial to localization of the Japanese language education in that country. And so it's hoped that through further development of this research, and what that means is, like I said, the framework of how to properly use own language is still very vague. I mean, it's there like the sandwich checking, but it's still not set in stone. So it still needs a lot of space for development. So students and teachers, hopefully with this development, own language can be used as a valuable tool in language learning and will not be regarded as a negative connotation in the classroom. All right, so that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening. It's my email if you have any questions or if you want the references, I'll be very happy to send them over. All right, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Azalea, for a wonderful presentation. That was very informative and I learned a lot. If I see we have a very small group, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourselves and giving Ms. Azalea a round of applause.
Thank you.
Oh, We do have about 9 minutes for questions. So if anyone would like to either virtually raise their hand or physically raise their hand to ask Mrs. Ilya some questions, now is the time.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You need to unmute yourself so that we can hear you.
Yes. It was a very interesting presentation. I have two questions. Have you tried these two activities that we did today with your student?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I have the first one, I have not yet tried it out yet because but I did not the online version, but in back when we had face-to-face classes, I did have them have their own handout so that they could also always refer to it when they don't understand something. So the online version is still in a test run. So today was a test run. But for the second one, I have done it before, the gapped translation with the online classes. Because I don't know, it's about interactive learning, where they kind of have fun when they get to see each other's questions being put and whatnot. So it's quite a fun activity that my students enjoy. So yeah.
Yes, and you know, the first activity, the first worksheet, I think it's so informative for teachers. What word is confusing, or you know, what point like students are not getting. And also I'm seeing that okay, I'd like to go back to the seat here.
Okay, I think I have it.
You break down with a the noun and the particle together, and it has a particle itself has a meaning. So I wonder, maybe you can break that, you know, the noun and the particle. What do you think? Have you?
Yeah, originally I did break it down. But since for the usually this kind of thing you introduce it in the very first class and for them to refer in future classes. So I was afraid that when you separate the particles no and o, it can be very like even if like they can Google and find jibun is oneself, ichibang is the best. But if you put o, if you try and Google o or find in dictionary, it won't necessarily come up and they'll just be like you know, like because the idea of what a particle is not exactly there yet, but perhaps maybe down the line with more when they have more learn more levels.
That's true.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. So my second question, it's a very general question. In Malaysia, do universities prefer native Japanese language teachers to, you know, local Malaysian teachers?
Mm. um that's a very interesting question. Like it's not actually preference per se, but the teaching style or the teaching method is very reflective on the native speaker style. So even though they don't
I see.
they don't mind if you are a Malaysian or you're not a native Japanese speaker, but your teaching style should be reflective.
Okay.
Like you should follow this style of teaching and not your own localized way of teaching.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in other words, they prefer the direct method still.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was very interesting presentation. ありがとうございました。
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll mute myself. Okay.
Do we have any other questions? We still have a few minutes. Jeannie? Jean,
yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I teach a Japanese class online in the evenings here at Iowa State. So it's interesting to get some ideas of how to make it more interactive.
Yeah.
I've never heard of the term own language before. I've heard of translanguaging and code mixing or code switching. What's the difference?
Well, Yeah, I was quite confused at first as well. They are actually kind of not exactly interchangeable, but I guess own language is more specific. Like I chose that definition from a Guy Cook's book and also from Philip Kerr, where it is basically more on the idea of that shared language. So that one community has, like I explained before, you have all those 3 or 4 language. So that is own language. So translanguaging, in my opinion, can actually mean the idea of interchanging between one language and the other, but not necessarily that. Also, I've been using I don't know if, wait, I can't see this. Oh yeah. So I usually use this book for the activities. It's translation and own language activities. It's by Philip Kerr. Those are where I got these activities from. So if you want more ideas on interactive teaching, I really suggest this book as well. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
thank you.
you.
And then I was wondering, like, have you noticed since beginning, like, working on your PhD in Japan, has like the number of jobs where they want a native English speaker to be the teacher, have they been increasing, decreasing, staying the same?
Um, from my personal experience, it's kind of the same. It's still
Ah,
it's still relative honestly it's relatively the same. Yeah, and but it's not just for just English. Like I noticed that even though I advertise myself as a English and Malay and Japanese teacher, I'm mostly offered the Malay language jobs where they say, oh, you're a Malaysian, so okay, we're gonna hire you because you're the Malaysian teaching Malay, even though, oh, but I can teach both English and Japanese. But it's, yeah, that's no thing.
that's unfortunate because second language teachers provide such a wealth of knowledge
Yeah.
because you actually learned English. So yeah, you know all the tips and tricks and all the roadblocks of the language.
Mm, yeah, exactly. I think that's what in Vivian Cook's multi-competence theory, what it's trying to push forward. Like being a language user in your own right is also what makes you kind of a good teacher because you know what the students are actually struggling with. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Azalea, for your presentation. Let's give her another round of applause before I stop the recording for the next presentation.
Thank you so much.